Hello, my name is Jorb. I love gear, and this is the Pittsburgh Modular Voltage Lab 2. Just like the original Voltage Research Lab, it is an experimental, unique, and radically deep synthesizer combined with an equally experimental, unique, and radically deep touch controller. It really isn't like anything else. Yes, some direct comparisons can be made to certain West Coast style synthesizers. You'll see people bring up the music easel a lot, certainly when talking about the original Voltage Lab, but I don't think those comparisons are really that fair. It's like comparing the original Planet of the Apes movies and the modern reboots. Yes, they have common elements, but they're separate. We're looking at something much more refined, much more capable, and it stands completely on its own. If the music easel was Conquest, then the VL2 is Dawn. In the synth world, in the synth space, we get caught up in that trap a lot, comparing back to classics, but something like this, like the Voltage Lab, it really deserves to be talked about completely as its own instrument, because I can't think of anything that is like it. Nothing is pre-patched, and there's not even really a default path, and the sort of presentation of the whole system means that experimentation is the only way to move forward, and I think that only works well because this sounds so good, and every module does more than you think it can. Any further detail would feel like a spoiler. Voltage Lab 2 is sick. I'm glad it exists. Let me show you what it can do. I am not getting paid to make this video, but Pittsburgh knows I'm making it, and I am getting paid to do some work on the manual for this synth. If you are subscribed, thanks for coming back. If you aren't, you should try it. Shout out to my patrons. Let's take a look. Surprise, it's editing Jorb. I've got a corrupt file, it's 2 a.m., and I leave for Berlin in the morning, and I don't want to mess with it anymore. So here's what we're going to do. This is going to be two videos. The sort of Jorb view, how to use the oscillators and the touch controller that I mentioned already. I'll end with one sort of pleasant demo. And instead of all the other demos, which the ones I do still have, I was too long-winded and they weren't good. It doesn't matter. This is going to be two videos. I'm going to put this one up for drop day, and once I'm back from Berlin, I'll do a longer video with full demos where I explain everything that you hear. How's that sound? I want to talk about stuff more than once anyway, so there you go. I think this is a win-win. Cool, cool. Back to it. Here we are with the Voltage Lab 2. You can see it's two totally separate sections. The top part is the Voltage Lab relay, and the bottom part is the touch controller. I can reach it from where I'm at. Here's a size comparison to the Taiga. These are 90 HP. I can't remember what the Taiga is. Keeps that same style, keeps those same knobs. It's the Pittsburgh identity now, and I think it's fantastic. My instinct for demonstrating anything, my first thought for demonstrating anything, is to give you close-up views of the panel, let you watch while I change knobs, listen, explain what you're hearing. That's my gut, and that's what I think I'm good at, but I don't think that's exactly the right way for me to talk about Voltage Lab 2. There's just so much. So I'm going to give you the normal amount of detail for what is totally new and totally unique. That is both of the oscillators, which are different, and the whole touch controller. I think there's so much potential to talk about for the touch controller that could be an hour on its own. So this is going to be the normal Jorb view of the oscillators and the touch controllers. We're going to go as in-depth as I normally would, and you're going to get a window tour of the rest of the sound generation. I'm still going to point out everything that's cool, of course, because how can I not? But we're really going to look in-depth at the oscillators and the touch controller. Everything else, the dynamics controller, the function generators, the two effects, I'm going to go through pretty quickly. Sound good? Cool. I'm going to get my voice out of the oscilloscope. To start, nothing is plugged in by default. Almost nothing is pre-patched or normaled, I guess, in the sound generation side. And there's nothing between the controller and the sound generation. So to hear anything, you need to set something up. That lends itself to the sort of open-ended nature of all of this, but it also means that I have to explain things from the get-go. So I'm just going to use this touch controller as a keyboard, and I'm going to gloss over a lot of the touch controller stuff for now. But I'm taking the pitch out of the touch controller. That's going into controlling just Oscillator One for now. I think I need a long one. I'm taking the output of Oscillator One, going into the first dynamics controller. Out of that dynamics controller. Out of this dynamics controller. It's going straight into our mono output. And it is controlling volume and harmonics right now. I also want to control that dynamics controller with our first function generator, which can be an envelope or an LFO. And I'm triggering that with the gate of that same channel. Okay, that's all we got, and a little bit of reverb from the Delverb. Just to make it a little easier for you and me to listen to. So the first oscillator might be familiar to you if you've used the Taiga. It is a combined oscillator and a wavefolder. And you start with these, they call them seeds. Those are your wave shapes. And we have a sine. That's it folded. And then a triangle. A sawtooth. And then a square. You might say, I noticed that square doesn't react super good to the wavefolder. Well, something that Pittsburgh has developed a while ago is this warp circuit. Is that light? Can you see that? Yep. And it gives you this sort of alternate version of each of these seed waves. That responds better to the wavefolder, and so there's a warped version of everything. I don't know if that started with the original Voltage Lab. I think it might have. I remember a video, the tagline, or what they say is, it folds the unfoldable. I think my favorite is a sawtooth. So that's all stuff we've seen before. But there is new synthesis technology, something called center clipping. So if I just give you a triangle there, I turn up this positive knob, the top half of the wave is getting brought down through the middle. Crazy. Of course, we can do that with the negative side as well. A separate knob. If you bring them both, it's really quiet. Almost nothing there. Both of them partially, you almost get things that sound like pulse width on waves that shouldn't have it. And then, of course, we could still fold all those waves after they've been center clipped. And the way that interacts with the wavefolder is crazy unique. It sounds like you're changing, you know, the sort of parameters of the wavefolder, but it doesn't sound more intense, I guess. Very, very cool. Very, very cool. We have another control, offset. It's just a positive offset to the wave. If I'm not center clipping anything, I don't really hear many changes. Hardly at all. But with center clipping, you can hear things. And of course, with the wave folding, again, it's shifting those harmonics. Very, very cool. We also have these two toggleable settings, AGC and focus. AGC is automatic gain control. On paper, it seems sort of utilitarian, right? It makes sure the wave stays about the same size no matter what you change. So you have pretty consistent volume, pretty consistent voltage throughout all these changes. What you end up hearing doesn't sound like a voltage compression. It sounds, again, like a different collection of timbre, a different collection of harmonics. And focus, I've only got one sentence about what it does, I think, in the sort of proto-manual. It recenters the wave. For center clipping, but again, I don't think that matters as much as what you hear. The harmonics are different. So modulating these things, cycling between these things, there's so much complexity available just here, just in a single oscillator. And just, I know I've said it almost exactly like this before, but people might say, oh, I wish I just had a normal filter. Even if you don't count the dynamic controllers working as low-pass gates, what does a filter do? Controls your harmonics. What is that doing? Just run an envelope there, and now you don't need a filter. You're controlling harmonics over time. There you we go. I think you guys get it. You can, of course, modulate the pitch and the offset. I will give you one additional example of modulation. So this is just the triangle LFO into the center clipping modulation. Speed that up a little bit. You have an option if you hold edit here and then press this button. You can turn on or off negative CV. So now the negative portion isn't getting modulated at all, just the positive portion. So much of what has existed in Pittsburgh stuff, that warp circuit, the wave folder, but these new additions, center clipping, I mean, these guys are really cooking. Okay, that's everything specific to Oscillator One. Oscillator Two is completely different. So if I just change our pitch and our output to be Oscillator Two here, I'm gonna tune this as well. If I have any small complaints, that's something I experienced on the Taiga as well. These are so precise because they have such a big range. I'm constantly bumping them. Yeah, that should be... Here we are. So in some respects, I suppose this could seem like a simpler oscillator, but it has a lot of interesting flexibility in and of its own. Are those out of the way? Yeah. So first, you have the same seeds. We've got a sine, a triangle, a sawtooth, and our square. And this big knob in the middle isn't a wavefolder, it's reflection. So reflection seems sort of related to wavefolding in that it relates to portions of a wave that go past a certain threshold. Let's just look. So we're sort of inverting every other... We're sort of inverting every other peak here. And the result for the first two, for sine and triangle, is bringing in harmonics until you're an octave up. Super cool. For the sawtooth, it morphs between a triangle, sort of a shark tooth in the middle, and then a saw, and then our pulse wave. Not that much happening from reflection on its own, but another new addition, as far as I understand it, to synthesis is this pulse symmetry. So we have normal pulse width. But we also have this pulse symmetry knob, which introduces this sort of middle step. To our pulse width. And we also have different options for where our pulse wave is seeded from. So here, we were on sine, so in the middle of the wave, and this is sawtooth, so theoretically at the beginning or the end. That gives us a stair step. This gives us a sort of plateau, I guess. I don't know what else to call it. You can seed the pulse width on both. What's the land formation? That's the butte. Nobody calls them that, and nobody should call them that. But different versions of a stepped wave. Here, it's a few steps short, but it almost is reminding me of a two oscillator setup, of a synced oscillator, a hard synced oscillator, combined with or maybe even a sort of bit reduction. Very, very cool. Additionally, we have soft clipping that can be implemented on all of these. And of course, reflection now does a lot with the pulse wave. I should mention, but that soft clipping works on everything. But a lot of the new interesting stuff is happening with the pulse wave. We have hard sync both ways, and if I sync 2 back to 1, Again, some really, really cool sounds. There you go. That's a lot of the in-depth stuff for the oscillators. One more thing. Each of them have an input for what is this big center knob. So if I have pitch controlling Oscillator 1 and the output of Oscillator 2, but the output of Oscillator 1 is going to the reflection in of Oscillator 2, I can have this folded wave run through that reflection circuit. And now, yes, I'm taking up the output of Oscillator 2, but you have a sine wave output for that. So this can separately be, then you still have access to your second oscillator. Or I suppose we could do the inverse of this. So if I take output of Oscillator 1, pitch in to Oscillator 2 out to timbre in, I could fold this reflected wave. Spectacular. I love these additions. There you go. I think that's everything for the oscillators. Truly unique, truly spectacular, and really, really cleverly flexible. Okay, so the window tour for everything else. I've been using function generator 1 only, and just as an envelope generator. They can be a 2-stage envelope, attack and decay. It could be a 3-stage envelope, attack, sustain, release. Or it can loop like an LFO. Both function generators can do that. You have CV over the rise and fall, also a combined CV for each of them, so both, and then you can independently attenuate. And they sort of interact in a lot of ways. You can trigger them based on the state the other one is in. So just a quick example of that. If function generator 2 is triggered by the input and the fall of function generator 1, I can get a sort of variable double hit. Very, very cool. Back to output, and I'll take those off. But you can trigger it off the input of the other, the rise of the other, the fall of the other. And I guess I might as well show you, you can get them to loop that way. Sort of phasing in and out of relation to each other, by having conditions set up where each of them can trigger the other without any additional patching. I think it's very, very cool. They also have combined outputs. Plus or is whichever one is higher at the time. The difference, of course, function generator 1 minus what's on function generator 2. The mix of both of them, and the negative mix, you invert function generator 1 and then add them together. That's very maths. If you're familiar with maths or some of the tricks you can do or the surprising amount of flexibility that comes from it, a lot of that functionality is present right here. Okay, the window tour continues. Simple LFO, a couple simple utilities, and a 10-uverter and an amplifier. All their controls, their ins and outs are always below where they're at. The dynamics controllers, if you aren't familiar with that terminology, are combined VCAs and filters. VCAs controlling just level, low pass gate and pluck are controlling your level and your harmonics. The difference between those two modes is the way they react to external modulation. Again, to highlight the interplay, there's a mix out of both of them, and you can control both dynamics controllers at once. Perhaps for stereo, there's these two utilities that don't really reflect on the panel at all. This mixer splitter and this just splitter. So one input to two outputs, or two inputs and two outputs for the mixer and splitter. And then two effects, which I will demonstrate quickly. The florist, which has been at least partially its own module before. I have the reverb off from the Delverb. It's a sort of pingy kind of lo-fi, kind of springy reverb-ish. Modulated, which I might as well just do that. You can modulate size of the florist. Slow down that LFO. It could be sort of flangery. Without any modulation, it's fine as a reverb. but a lo-fi one, definitely. I'm going to get us out of there, and let's listen to the echoes, which if you are familiar with Taiga, you're familiar with echoes. It is a pretty short, pretty simple lo-fi delay. Sounds good, but it's just not long enough, I think, to be useful. So really, both of these effects feel more experimental than they do as a sort of finisher. You know, I say that, and then I immediately like that. And I know that's how I felt about it on Taiga as well, at its maximum, or just below its maximum delay time. It could be really interesting. That's everything on the top part except for the very, very cool chant sequencer. So the chant sequencer is a sort of Euclidean, sort of random. It'll send out a CV and a gate. You decide the number of steps as the clock cycles through it and the density of those steps within, and then chants how likely it is for each of those to sort of activate this random element, this random thing. So if I take the CV out and I send it to the FM of Oscillator One, I make this very likely high chance. I'm actually going to send it the clock from the bottom. Yeah. So there, you can tell. So there you go. It's a random voltage. If I quantize that CV, it's giving us even note increments. You know what? I can also trigger the function generator with the gate of this. I think you get it. It can be a sort of random sequencer. It could be a random trigger sequencer, a random CV sequencer. It's a source of randomness. Hint, hint. So back to where we were. Or I guess you could use it as a sort of pseudo sample and hold, which I should mention there's a sample and hold utility here as well. Anyway, I got to move on. I'm taking so much time. There is so much to talk about with the bottom part, with the touch controller. It is two separate sequencers that have their own channel of CV that share this middle blue channel. I'm going to start with just doing one channel at a time, okay? So the first thing, I'm in keyboard mode. And that is locked to a key and a scale. So if I hit edit, and then on the bottom, you can see here key and scale, press that pad, C minor. Or edit, key, scale, D sharp minor. Okay, and it'll stay locked. And it'll stay locked in that key over that whole range. Separately, if I go down again to edit and I hit top row settings, look at the white labels on top. I could change the keyboard mode to knob. Now they don't change unless these knobs on top. So you can use that to sort of make a custom keyboard, but it'll be still locked to your scale. But more interestingly, if I turn on the sequencer for this first channel, this red channel, and then I just hit, and if I just put these triggers down and I hit run, it'll go through. Actually, I'm going to change edit, sequence length. Let's just make that 8. Great, and you'll notice each step is a little different. This blue channel is actually how long that trigger is. And that, of course, also relates to how I've got this function generator, so that's why you're hearing it. First, and I guess I should say, these don't have to be pitch, and gate. They don't have to be sequencing an oscillator. That's just the easiest to demonstrate and hear and understand and all that. It could be anything. Okay, so there's your first super simple. I could also have this be, if I turn off all these steps and I go back to edit top row keyboard. It's a little harder to do this because there's no metronome, but I can. It's a little harder to do this because there's no metronome, but if I watch this. You can plug it in on the keyboard. But I much prefer when it's in sequencer mode to use the sort of knob mode. Okay, I manually put those in. I could also do a Euclidean generation. So if I hold the bottom and hit Euclidean generator, our number of steps is chosen by our length and our density is changed by just sliding up, or I can change this value knob. Not that different. Swing and humanize are both about timing here in this situation. Quantize on or off also is about timing. That's separate to the key and scale quantization, and it's a sort of quantize amount. So if I turn that way down, then turn humanize way up. You can get it to sort of stumble. Okay, and there's also per step conditions, so I can make different steps longer. So edit step length, let's say 1 and 4 are the length of 2 steps. You can see the light hangs on there extra long. Or I can add a roll or a ratchet. Two individual steps. I don't think 3 sounds very good. I also don't think 4 sounds very good. Okay, already getting kind of wacky. There's also something called a step jump, and that'll just take us from a step all the way to another one. So if I say, I don't know, on 4, sometimes go to 8. And so the way you decide how often that happens, step jump, pick our jump, and while that's flashing, I'm actually going to turn this off. Edit, step jump, pick the step that's jumping, and now I change this value knob. Okay? It works in 2 halves. It's probability up to the first half, and the second half, I think, is a little confusing. It's a little confusing at first, but once you know what you're looking at, it's not so bad. It's a sort of Electron-style play once, skip once interface, right? So divide this in the middle, and every group of 2 pads is giving you some piece of information, okay? So on the right, this is telling us, okay, there's 2 passes through before it repeats. And on the left, I'm seeing, okay, I'm going to trigger on the first pass and not on the second. Okay? This would be do not trigger on the first pass, do trigger on the second, and then repeat. So now we have 3 potential steps. Do trigger, do not, do not. Don't, do, don't. Okay? Do, do, don't. Don't, do, do. And then we can get this all the way up to 4 steps. That's the maximum. And I can say something as complicated as do, do, don't, do, and then repeat. Here is 1, 2, 3, 4 cycles before it repeats. This is 3 cycles. This is 2 cycles. Play once, skip once. Play once, skip twice. Skip twice, play once. Does that make sense? So we're going to do play once, skip twice. Okay? For that step jump. And what step jump was it again? That's skipping from 4 all the way to 8. So it played it, and it skipped it, and it skipped it. It's got to play it this time. Does that make sense? So instead of getting to 5, 4 will go right to 8. Already pretty complicated, right? And I think, like, if I'm just speaking from my personal perspective, not the perspective of a demonstrator, okay? This is not a way I love to interact with a sequence. But I'm seeing the power, and I'm seeing the sort of, if you sit down and give it time, you can, like, build something really, really complicated. Or if you just want to, like, quickly throw something up, tap a bunch of spots, set the knobs wherever I want, randomly put rolls and jumps, and then sort of adjust. Like, get something really complicated, really dense, and then sort of adjust and figure out where it repeats. I can really see the power. Anyway, that's just, all of that's just been the first sequencer, and I've used this middle channel a little bit. If you look at, can you see? Can you read all the outputs there? So just for the red channel, we have pressure, that's mostly for keyboard mode, CV, which is unquantized what's on the knob, pitch, which is from the knob, but also relative to the key and scale you have locked in. And then for the CV channel, that's the blue one, a gate, a variable length envelope, and its CV. It's just like raw value, along with a trigger, along with inputs for a bunch of stuff. And, oh, you know what? I should show you chance. So chance is different from these sort of step conditions, right? Step conditions are length, jump, and roll. These three over here. But chance is sort of a global randomization, or potential at least for randomization. So if I hit edit, and then all the way on the right here, look on the top, you see white chance effects. That's pitch, trigger, shift, and roll. So if I hit top row settings, and let's just start with pitch, and I turn this all the way up and I run. The pitches are random. More or less random. Okay, that doesn't have to be pitch. It doesn't have to be pitches. It can be if a note is trigger or not. It can be if you shift to another point in the sequence or not. It can be if you ratchet, if you re-trigger or not. But just to show you one potential use case for this blue CV channel, let's say I only want randomness on certain steps. Well, that chance knob can be an input, and this output, that raw CV from this blue channel, can let us change per step of the red sequence what we're sending to that chance value. Let's make it more obvious. Turn it all down. Let's just make it random on that last step. If that makes sense. So we can use that. We can use this blue channel as a per step CV for anything else. And if I inputted the notes with the keyboard, I can use the red channel the same way. Got to take that out just so I don't forget. But I hope that gives you an idea of like how flexible these are on their own. How flexible each channel can be on their own. And there's two of them. I haven't shown you anything from the yellow channel. You decide which one you're controlling by pressing one or the other red and yellow buttons here, or you can press them both at the same time. And now, no matter what I have selected for each of them, I'm passing through this touch plate is controlling both. So right now, you know, I should get a second voice set up. Hang on. Pitch out of yellow. Pitch in Oscillator 2. Gate out, second function generator. Out of the function generator. There we go. So right now I'm controlling just the yellow channel. So now I'm just controlling the yellow channel. And even though I'm using the second channel as a keyboard and the first channel as a sequencer, I can control them together. So even while this is running, if I... You see I'm triggering those red steps on and off? Super weird. Super weird. I don't think that specific use case is useful, but just as a small example, I'm only going the first 8 steps for the sequencer here. If I want to use the right F, for the yellow channel, I can totally do that. Alternatively, I can just stop controlling the red channel and still use that all the same. So like right now you can see I'm already getting into a little bit like, oh, whoops, I meant to do run and stop for just red, or I meant to just turn off the sequencer for red. You can get into some sort of, I don't know, finger twister. Even though sometimes it doesn't matter if you have them both selected, like I showed you in that right side. But if I hit octave up right now, even though I'm used to just controlling yellow, it controls them both. So you get, see, just then I did it. I expected my run and stop to stop what was running, but I wasn't controlling the red. So there's a little bit of finger twister between the channels, but if you like stop and slow down, honestly, the thing that I use it, both of them at the same time for the most, is setting the key in the scale, you know, and things like loading and saving sequences, or changing the clock division. And I kind of see the vision on letting you control them both at the same time, especially if you're not using them as two separate pitches. Maybe one of them's drums, maybe one of them's something percussive and the other one's melodic, to just throw down your gates and then swap between them. I do see the potential there. I also think a master transport, or some of these being separate for each controller. I would go crazy for a separate run and stop. I would go crazy for a master transport to just avoid some of that sort of, I'm saying finger twisted like getting tongue-tied, you know what I mean? You just sort of trip over what it is you meant to do. And I find that a little bit frustrating. But I also see the vision and I see the power in changing some of those things globally. And to not leave it up to the designer, to leave it up to you, the player, to determine what you do and don't care about controlling at once, I think that is, in the spirit of the instrument, the correct choice. Okay, that's most of what I wanted to get across pretty simply. I am going to show you some really, really wacky stuff. So even while the sequencer is not running, there are other ways to, use these channels and these steps that have nothing to do with actually running the sequencer. So there's a scan input here. And if I send the inverted output of our second function generator, and I trigger that with the yellow channel, let's make it just, I want it to be trigger once. I can just press the trigger, and this function generator will scan through these steps. Really, really quick. How about slower? Isn't that? So that scan lets you have CV controlling the step. And once it passes that step, or it gets voltage, you know, triggering whatever, then off it goes. That could also be something as simple as the CV out of the step sequencer, the chant sequencer up here. And I could have just picked, you know, a variety of pitches that are now getting triggered by that. It could be something crazy. It could just be an oscillator. You know, the possibilities are endless. And I bring that up to highlight again the interplay. That scan is a really, I think, a fantastic example of it, because what was just modulating my dynamics controller is now going through every step, and everything that was triggering and everything that matters to each of those steps, you know what I mean, is happening just as if I ran it through the sequencer. And I just mean to over and over highlight every single module is more flexible than you think it is. This is a sequencer and a keyboard, yes, but even within those, you can manipulate them to be so much more, to be so specific. Fantastic. What I'm going to do now, I think you've got a sort of introduction to all of these things. I'm going to set up a complicated patch, let it play for a little bit, and then sort of explain what it is we're hearing. I think you've seen enough. I think that's more valuable than look at this section, look at this section, look at this setting. What do you think? Does that sound good?